There are two kinds of fear in this world. The kind that hits you fast, sharp, and clean, like a car horn in the dark. And then there is the other kind. The kind that moves slowly, like cold water rising around your ankles in a room with no doors. The stories I am about to tell you are that second kind. And I promise you, by the time I am done, you will never look at your attic the same way again. When I was a kid, the attic scared me more than the basement ever did. I know that sounds backwards. Ask anyone and they will tell you basements are the scary ones. Dark, underground, cut off from everything. But our basement never bothered me much. Our attic, though, that was a different story entirely. And if I had to put my finger on exactly why, I think it comes down to one thing. It was wrong. Not terrifying, not obviously disturbing, just wrong. Like a sentence with one word slightly out of place that your brain keeps catching on without knowing why. For one thing, it was huge. Most attics are cramped, tight spaces where you hunch your spine and shuffle sideways between dusty boxes. Ours was not like that at all. You could stand fully upright in there, walk around without ever bowing your head. You might think more space would mean less fear, more room, more light, more normal. But somehow it had the opposite effect. All that extra space felt like it had been built for something, like it was waiting to be used in a way it never was. My parents treated it as a storage room and nothing more. Looking back now, I think they avoided it more than they needed to. They never said why. I never asked. The other thing was the layout. The attic was broken up by thick wooden beams of uneven size, scattered with no pattern I could ever detect. The floor rose and dipped in unexpected places. Old joists jutted upward at odd angles like something had pushed them from below. The result was that no matter where you stood, you could not see the entire space from one position. There were always corners out of view. There were always pockets of shadow the light could not quite reach. My dad used to joke that if any of us ever slipped on one of those joists, we would crash right through the insulation and punch a hole in the ceiling below. He said it like it was funny. But standing in that space as a kid, it never felt funny to me. The maze quality was what got to me most. Every time I went up there, I had this feeling of being watched, that just around the next beam, just past that next shadow, something was standing very still and waiting for me to get close enough. I know how that sounds. I was a child. Kids get scared. But what I am about to tell you is not something I have ever been able to explain away with that logic, no matter how many years have passed. Most of my memories from that period of my life have faded the way childhood memories do. You get flashes, fragments, the general feeling of a summer without being able to name a single day in it. But this memory never faded. It never softened. It sits in the middle of everything I remember from those years like something sharp pressed against the inside of a pocket. It happened during the week because I had school that morning. I cannot tell you exactly how old I was, but I was somewhere in middle school. I woke up and the first thing I noticed, before I noticed anything else, was the bottoms of my feet. They were filthy. Gray, gritty, coated in a fine layer of dirt that had worked its way between my toes. I sat on the edge of my bed in the morning light just staring at them. I had not gone outside the night before. I had not done anything remotely unusual. I had gotten into bed, fallen asleep, and woken up with feet that looked like I had been walking barefoot across an unwashed floor. Being a kid, I did not spiral into panic over it. I washed my feet and went to school and put it out of my mind. But the thing about something being unexplainable is that it does not stay out of your mind for long. A few days later, there was a box in my room that did not belong there. A small cardboard box filled with old photographs, the kind my parents kept tucked away in the attic, sealed from decades of being unretrieved. I had no memory of bringing it down. Zero. When I asked my mom about it, she shrugged and assumed I had been poking around upstairs for some reason. I told her I had not. She did not seem bothered. She took the box back up, and that was the end of it, for her. Then came the lamp. I woke up one morning, and there it was on my desk. An ugly brass thing, old and heavy, something I vaguely recognized from the back of the attic without ever really looking at it closely. There was no part of me that had any memory of carrying it through the house in the middle of the night. You do not carry a lamp down an attic ladder while you are asleep and forget about it. That is not how it works, but there it was, and that was the moment the three things lined up in my head all at once. The dirty feet, the box of photographs, the lamp. I was sleepwalking. Not just sleepwalking, but sleepwalking directly to the attic every time. The realization did not scare me immediately. It unsettled me in a quieter, stranger way. I was apparently navigating that maze of beams and uneven joists in total darkness while completely unconscious, without ever hurting myself, without any memory of it at all. When I told my parents, their response was predictably calm. Sleepwalking is normal. Lots of kids do it. You will grow out of it. They were not cruel about it, not dismissive exactly, just unbothered in the way adults get when a problem does not feel serious enough to warrant serious attention. But for me, it was something else entirely. After the next incident, bedtime became something I dreaded. I would lie on my back in the dark for hours past when I should have been asleep, fighting unconsciousness with everything I had. Terrified of what version of me might take over once I finally lost that fight. I obviously could not stay awake forever, and so every morning became a ritual. I would swing my legs over the side of the bed and look at the bottoms of my feet before I did anything else. Clean feet meant a good night. Dirty feet meant I had been up there again. Clean nights outnumbered the bad ones, but the bad nights were bad in a way that lingered for days. The worst part was never being able to know what I had done up there or how long I had spent doing it. For all I knew, I was spending more time in that attic than in my own bed. That kind of fear is something hard to describe to someone who has not felt it. It is not the fear that comes from a loud noise or a dark room. It is the fear of being a stranger to yourself. The dread that your own body might be doing things your mind has no access to. It settles into you and it does not leave. But none of that was the worst of it. The worst came on one particular night that I have never been able to fully stop thinking about. I woke up and it was dark, not dim, not shadowy, but completely black, and I was standing. That was the first thing that registered. Not where I was or what time it was, just the physical fact that I was upright. My brain took a few seconds to catch up with my body. And when it did, recognition landed on me like something dropped from a great height. I was in the attic. I could not see a single thing, not the beams, not the boxes, not the walls. Not the hatch in the floor that was my only way back down. Nothing but absolute, impenetrable black in every direction. The fear that moved through me in that moment was unlike anything I had experienced before or since. I stood completely still because moving felt dangerous, and the dark felt alive, and every instinct I had was screaming at me not to make a sound. Standing there was like being buried alive, except the walls were invisible. I had to move eventually. I knew that. So I started slowly, arms outstretched, shuffling my feet across the uneven floor 1 inch at a time. And I was crying. Not making a sound, but the tears were coming anyway, warm against my face in the cold of the attic. And beneath the fear of falling, beneath the fear of hurting myself in the dark, there was another fear sitting underneath everything else. The feeling that I was not alone. I could not have told you where it came from. There was no logical reason to feel it. But it was there, certain and heavy, the conviction that something else was in that attic with me, somewhere further back in the dark where the shadows were thickest. And then I heard something. A soft thud from behind me, the unmistakable sound of weight shifting on old floorboards. I kept moving, but I heard it again, and then a third time, and each time it came from a slightly different location, as though whatever was making it was also moving through the dark. I found the hatch eventually. I do not know how long it took. I went straight to my parents' room, pushed their door open, and by the time I reached the side of their bed, I was not crying silently anymore. My dad agreed to check the attic. I stood at the bottom of the ladder and watched him climb up, and there was a part of me, a genuinely terrified part, that did not believe he was coming back down. But 2 minutes later, he was already descending the ladder, telling me there was nothing up there and sending me back to bed. He did not say it unkindly. He just said it simply, the way you say something that you believe is true. Lying in my bed after that was the worst night of my life. The sleepwalking eventually stopped after that, and I am not sure what I would have done if it had continued. But even now, years later, I have never been fully able to accept the sleepwalking explanation. I know it is the rational one. Sleepwalking is real. It happens to real people, and it has real, boring, biological causes. But I always ended up in the same place. Always the attic, never anywhere else in the house. And I navigated that maze in total darkness repeatedly, without a single scratch or bruise to show for it. And those sounds I heard, I have never stopped believing there was something else up there with me. My parents have always given me the same polite, deflecting answers whenever I have brought it up as an adult, which is almost stranger than the original story. This next one happened when I was 14 or 15. My family lived in a house that had passed through the same bloodline for generations. My dad grew up there. His parents grew up there before him. I do not live there anymore, but some memories do not care whether you have left or not. They follow you. The house had an attic like most old houses do. Mostly a graveyard for things nobody wanted to deal with, old furniture, boxes of accumulated decades, Christmas decorations. The decorations were really the only reason anyone ever went up there. Once a year to bring everything down, and once more to carry it all back. That particular Christmas, my dad decided I was old enough to handle the job myself. He gave me a rundown of where everything was, something about the lights being stored near the back wall in a separate container, and I nodded like I was absorbing every word. I was not. My head was somewhere else entirely. By the time he finished talking and sent me upstairs, I had retained exactly none of it. I pulled down the attic chain and stood in the yellow light looking around at the clutter, and I very quickly realized that I had absolutely no idea what I was supposed to be grabbing. Going back down to ask him to repeat himself was not an option. My dad had a particular intolerance for having to say things twice that verged on a genuine character flaw. So I just started opening boxes at random, moving things around, creating a slow spreading chaos in my search for anything that looked like it could be Christmas related. After about 20 minutes of this, I had made an absolute disaster of the place. I eventually found what I needed, made 4 or 5 trips down the ladder hauling everything to the living room, and then went back up for one final look to make sure I had not missed anything. It was while I was standing there in the wreckage of my own searching that I noticed the box. It was tucked into one of the back corners, partially hidden behind the things I had shoved around during my search. Unlike everything else up there, it was not flimsy cardboard. It was something sturdier, the kind of heavy-duty box you might use for documents or fireproofing, dark-colored, almost black. And despite clearly being built to last, it somehow looked older than everything else in that attic. Old in a way that felt different from the surrounding clutter. I opened it. Inside were papers. An alarming number of them. Notebooks, loose pages, hand-drawn maps, and several sheets of what appeared to be sheet music. And every single page was completely covered in handwriting. The maps, the notebooks, the sheet music margins, all of it filled edge to edge with the same dense, cramped hand. I sat down on the attic floor and started reading. The writing was difficult to parse at first. The lettering had an odd quality to it that my eyes needed time to adjust to, but gradually it opened up to me. The pages were not dated, but appeared to be stacked in rough chronological order. The earliest entries were mundane to the point of being dull. Whether observations, household chores, small domestic thoughts, a diary of an ordinary life. But as I kept reading, the entries changed, gradually at first and then all at once. The handwriting became less controlled, the lines starting to tilt and crowd one another, and the content shifted entirely. Whoever had written these pages had become consumed, obsessed in a way that felt less like curiosity and more like compulsion with the attic, specifically with its dimensions. They had measured the attic, repeatedly, obsessively, comparing the measurements against the footprint of the house below, and according to their calculations, the numbers did not add up. There was space along one of the walls, several feet of it, that could not be accounted for by any room below. A gap, a void. The entries that followed were entirely devoted to this wall. The writer had catalogued every crack, every indent, every surface irregularity with a precision that started to feel less like investigation and more like fixation. And then the entries became frantic. The writer had begun spending hours in the attic, sometimes sleeping up there, and they had begun hearing things from behind the wall, scratching, breathing. Sounds from within a space that by all logic should have been empty. There were timestamps. 2:14 in the morning, scratching for approximately 3 minutes. 3:47 breathing sounds, duration unknown. The entries kept getting worse, more fragmented, less coherent. The handwriting became something closer to marks than letters, and then the final pages contained nothing but tally marks. Row after row after row of them, counting something that was never identified. And then the writing simply stopped. By the time I finished reading, I was shaking. And before I could convince myself not to, my eyes went to the wall, the one the writer had been so obsessed with. And when I saw that there were actually indentations there, actual marks in the surface, I felt the floor tilt slightly beneath me. I examined it more closely. The cracks, the irregularities, they aligned almost exactly with what the entries had described. The feeling that washed over me was not one I had a name for. It was the sensation of being watched from multiple directions simultaneously, and of realizing that the person who had written those pages had stood in this exact spot and felt it too. It was like he was still in the room, like the attic had kept a piece of him. I took the box straight to my dad. He was as shaken as I was. He had never seen it before, was certain the handwriting was not his father's, which placed whoever had written it at least a generation before my grandfather. Beyond that, he knew nothing. The people who had lived in that house before his parents were unknown to him entirely. But my dad did not stand around theorizing. He went up to the attic himself, taking me with him, and spent several minutes examining the wall using the pages as a guide. Then he went quiet. I watched his expression change into something I could not easily read, a mix of things, and then he told me he was going to tear the wall down. I did not argue. He got tools from the garage and he did it, and what was behind it stopped both of us cold. There was a space back there, a significant one, several feet deep, running the full length of the wall. A hidden room that had been sealed inside the house. But that was not what held us there in stunned silence. It was the walls of that space. They were covered floor to ceiling in markings. Black lines, shapes, symbols that neither of us could identify or name. They covered almost every inch of surface. Not writing exactly, but something deliberate, something that had required enormous time and intention to produce. My dad and I stood in the opening and looked at it for a long time without speaking. And then the question arrived that neither of us wanted to ask out loud. There was no other entrance to that hidden space. No door, no panel, no gap of any kind. Which meant that whoever had made those markings had done so from inside a sealed room. We confirmed there was nothing else in there. The space was completely empty except for whatever had been drawn across every surface. We went back downstairs and sat with it. And eventually, my dad said something quietly that I think had been forming in his mind since we first found the box. He pointed out that whoever wrote those notebooks, someone that deep in compulsion, someone filling pages with tally marks and timestamps and dimensional measurements, would not have neatly organized everything into a tidy black box and tucked it into a corner. That kind of mind does not end in orderly archival work, so someone else had done the collecting. Someone had gathered the loose papers and the notebooks and the maps, placed them in that box and hidden it. My dad knew before I finished the thought. He said quietly that it must have been his father, my grandfather. He must have found it at some point, gathered it all together, and sealed it away without ever saying a word to anyone. My dad admitted years later that this would stay with him forever. Not just the hidden room, not just the markings, but the fact that his own father had known about it and chosen silence. As for me, I have never been able to rationalize any part of it. The entries described things that could only have been written after the wall was already in place, from outside of it. But the markings could only have been made from inside a space with no entrance. It is a thing that has no explanation that holds together under any pressure. My dad would not let me take the box when we eventually moved. For all I know, it is still up there, waiting in that same corner in the dark. And this is a question I will carry with me until I cannot carry anything anymore. I have been smoking for 23 years. At this point, it is not really a habit anymore. It is more of a ritual, a way to mark the end of a day, something to do with my hands when the evening gets quiet. I do not smoke inside. My parents were the same way when they lived here, even though my dad had a thing for cigars on occasions that warranted them. I inherited this house from them about 4 years ago when they finally made good on their lifelong threat to move to Florida. They had been talking about it since I was in my 20s, and I think they needed to know the house was in steady hands before they could actually let it go. My own timing happened to be right. I was divorced, living in an apartment that was exactly as small and bleak as you are imagining. And when they offered, I said yes immediately. The only thing I will say against the arrangement now is that a 3-story colonial is a lot of house for one person, and the silence inside it has a particular quality that takes some adjusting too. The backyard is close to an acre if you count the wooded stretch that runs along the back of the property line. I have gotten into the habit of walking its perimeter late at night before I come back in. It takes about 10 minutes at a relaxed pace. The kind of walk that feels like it is for the smoking, but is really for the thinking. Just me and the dark and the sound of crickets, and whatever small things are moving around out there in the trees. The only light back there comes from the house itself, which casts a long rectangle across the grass and then fades into nothing at the edge of the woods. There is one thing about the house worth knowing before I tell you what happened. It is very old and it moves like an old house does. The floors creak, the windows draft. Every step you take anywhere in there makes itself known. It is practically impossible to walk through that house without announcing yourself. It also has an attic, accessed by a pull-down ladder in the upstairs hallway. I only go up there when I need decorations, or when I am storing something of my parents' that I cannot bring myself to throw away but have no real use for. There is a small window up there, maybe a foot across, original to the house, that looks out over the backyard at an angle that always seemed slightly out of proportion with everything else around it. I have looked up at that window hundreds of times on my evening walks. It had never once caught my attention in a way that made me pause. That changed 3 weeks ago. I was halfway through a cigarette on my usual loop when my eyes drifted upward to the house for no particular reason. Not because I was thinking about the attic or the window or anything related to either. I just looked up, and for a fraction of a second, I saw something move behind that small window. I stopped walking. I stood in the middle of the backyard and stared up at the dark glass. There was nothing visible now. No light up there, of course, but I had been almost certain I had seen a shape pass across the glass, or something shifting in the darkness just beyond it. I stood there for a moment, then told myself I was being ridiculous. A cloud reflection, a bat. I finished my cigarette and went back inside and did not think about it again until the following night when I saw it again. This time I did not talk myself out of what I had seen. This was not a reflection of anything. Something was moving in my attic. My first hope was an animal. Squirrels worked their way into old houses all the time, and I would not have been surprised to find a gap somewhere in the eaves. But then I started trying to think about what kind of animal would be large enough to register as visible movement from where I was standing, and I did not have a comfortable answer to that question. I went back inside and stood at the bottom of the stairs looking up at the ceiling above the hallway. I was listening for scratching, for scurrying, for any of the small sounds an animal would make. There was nothing, absolute quiet, which should have been reassuring. Instead, it made the skin on the back of my neck feel strange. I did not want to go up there. I want to be honest about that. Every part of me was looking for a reason not to. But the alternative was going to bed knowing something was in my attic and not knowing what. So I turned on my phone's flashlight, pulled down the ladder, and started climbing. The layout of the attic meant I would be blind until I was already through the opening. If something was waiting just above the hatch, I would not see it until my head was already through. I climbed slowly. I kept climbing. I was not prepared for what I saw. It was not an animal. It was not a person either. The attic had been destroyed, not messily rearranged. Destroyed. Every box overturned, every bin emptied, everything that had been up there upended and scattered. But none of that was what stopped me cold. What stopped me cold was the black paint, or what looked like paint. It was smeared across every wall, all 4 of them, and across the ceiling as well. Thick, almost chunky in places, deeply black, and it was wet, visibly, unmistakably wet, dripping in thin lines down the walls in places, fresh enough that it had not begun to dry. I gripped the ladder and my brain processed exactly one thought. Someone had been in my house. I swept the attic with my flashlight in one fast pass to confirm no one was still up there. Then I came down the ladder so quickly I nearly fell. Within seconds the fear had curdled into something else. Anger. A cold, focusing kind of anger. I went through every room in the house, checking closets, checking corners, checking under beds. I found nothing. And the longer I searched without finding anything, the more the anger drained back out of me and the fear rushed back in to fill its place. I cleared the house and went back to my bedroom, trying to think, and that was when I heard it. Two heavy thumps, followed by the sound of something being dragged across the floor directly above me. The attic, whoever it was, had never left. They had been hiding among the overturned boxes while I swept the flashlight around and missed them entirely. I do not know what happened in my brain in that moment, but something shifted. This was my parents' house. I grabbed the biggest knife in the kitchen and went back upstairs. My hands were shaking badly enough that gripping the ladder rungs was difficult. I climbed anyway, and when I came through that opening, I came through screaming. I burst into the attic yelling with the knife and knocked over everything within reach and stomped across the floor like I was trying to make the house itself feel my presence. There was no one there. The attic was one open space with nowhere to hide, and I was certain of that now. But there was something new up there that had not been there before. Scratch marks. Long, deep gouges cut into the wooden beams and the floorboards, the kind of marks that take force and time and something like desperation to make. The black paint was still on every wall. But now the scratches were layered over it, over everything. I stared at those gouges for a few seconds, and then something in me simply ran out. I went to the first-floor bathroom, locked the door behind me, and called the police. 2 officers checked the attic while I waited downstairs with the third. When they came back down, they told me it was empty. They also told me they had found no gaps, no entry points, no way anything could have gotten in from the outside. Their conclusion was that whoever had vandalized the property must have slipped out through the house while I was searching. I told them that was impossible. I told them about the floors, about the fact that you cannot move anywhere in that house without sound traveling, that I would have heard any footstep from 1 floor down. They listened. They had nothing else to offer. They left. It has been 3 weeks. Nothing else has happened. I have not been back in the attic, not even to clean the walls. The rational explanation, the one that sits on the surface and asks me to accept it, is that a vagrant somehow found a way in, made a mess for reasons I will never understand, and got out without my knowing. I understand that explanation. I cannot make myself believe it. I know what I saw, I know what I heard, and I know what those scratches looked like. There are things that happened in that attic that a homeless person looking for shelter does not explain. And the truth is I still do not know what does. I just know that I have been doing my evening walks differently since that night. I do not look up at the window anymore. I have decided, for now at least, that I would rather not see whatever might be standing up there looking back.